Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Elliott School for International Affairs, thank you all for joining us today. I'm Ned Lazarus. I'm teaching associate professor here at the Elliott School and an Israel Institute teaching fellow. I want to thank the Israel Institute for their support, the Elliott School for assistance with publicity, and Robin Kahn especially for all of her help with putting this together and facilitating today's meeting online. Thank you above all to our outstanding panelists, Tal Shalev of Walla News, Hamad Daraushe of Givat Chaviva, and Michael Koplow of the Israel Policy Forum for sharing their expert insights with us today. I'll give a brief introduction and then turn it over to our guests. I have a few opening questions for them, and we'll follow those with questions from our audience, which you can write into the Q&A function, which you should find on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So, to all of you in the audience, thank you for joining the latest installment in our semi-annual Israeli elections lecture series. In case you're losing track, this one is episode 5, which I've entitled matter-of-factly, Israel Votes Again, because I have already used to Bibi or not to Bibi at least once, and I'm frankly running out of catchy titles at this point. I did originally come up with a rhyming subtitle for this one that seemed fitting at the time, Deja Vu or Netanyahu in 2022, with a question mark. But for the first time since April 2019, that question mark seems to have been actually, clearly, and conclusively answered on election day itself by the voters themselves, irrespective of coalition negotiations and party politics. Or has it? Perhaps, after 4 inconclusive elections in 3 years, no one remembers that the pilot episode of our series was, at the time, a shocker. After election number 1 in April 2019, headlines unanimously reported a decisive victory for Netanyahu, who, we were told, would easily form a government with a comfortable right-wing majority of 65 members of Knesset. No one imagined that lifelong hardliner Avigdor Lieberman would block Bibi's return to power then and 3 more times in a row, ultimately interrupting Netanyahu's 12-year reign. I'll try to provide a brief recap of what happened in our previous episode so that our panelists don't have to. This year's parliamentary election was the 25th in Israeli history, but more important, the 5th national election in a period of 3.5 years, making Israel arguably the goat of political instability, the most frequent election holder among all developed democracies. In each new election, the political deck has been slightly reshuffled. At least 10 parties that won seats in previous rounds are not represented in the current Knesset. Other things have remained constant throughout. Every election, Likud leader Binyamin Netanyahu, the once and now likely future prime minister, has run in the shadow of corruption charges, first as a suspect and then 4 times as an indicted criminal defendant. In 4 previous elections, his Likud party won about 25% of the overall vote, but he could not cobble together a governing majority of 61 out of the 120 members of Knesset. After 2 2019 elections, no new government was formed at all. In March 2020's round 3, Netanyahu convinced his rival Benny Gantz to form a national emergency government to deal with the surging COVID-19 pandemic. But the pandemic far outlasted that government, which collapsed after 6 months. After another seemingly inconclusive election in March 2021, an improbable coalition of 8 parties from the Zionist left, center, and right formed a new government together with the Islamist United Arab List, the smallest party in that Knesset and the first ever Arab party to join an Israeli government. This government was also notable as the first Israeli government in 12 years not led by Binyamin Netanyahu. The unwieldy alliance was instead led by Naftali Bennett, whose own religious right Yamina party held only 6 seats, having won only about 5% of the national vote. That government exceeded the expectations of many, passing a national budget twice, something that had not happened since 2018. But it still succumbed to its inherent ideological contradictions after just over a year in power. For any seeking more detailed chronicle of this chaos, I refer you to the excellent Elections Era resource provided online by Michael's organization, the Israel Policy Forum. Now, before this Tuesday's vote, the polls indicated another 60-60 deadlock between the blocs, and pundits predicted Groundhog Day. For some of us, this might have been wishful thinking. The results this time were shockingly decisive. 64 seats for pro-Netanyahu parties, 32 for the Likud, and I'll share a quick graphic here. 32 for the Likud, 14 for the extreme right Religious Zionism Party, and 18 for the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism. So this broke the tie with what appeared to be a pro-Bibi landslide, 64 seats for the pro-Bibi bloc. That impression, however, may also be an illusion, because the total votes cast were essentially equal for the 2 blocs. Roughly 2.3 million Israelis voted for parties supporting Netanyahu, and roughly 2.3 million Israelis voted against Netanyahu. 2 parties on the far left of the Israeli spectrum fell just short of the minimum threshold of 3.25%, and in the process wasted nearly 300,000 votes against Bibi's return to power. The ascendance of the far right in this election is not even as shocking, perhaps, as the political malpractice on the center left. To an American observer, this boggles the mind. And that is why we are so privileged to have 3 panelists so fluent in the arcane details of Israeli politics that their minds cannot be boggled. Perhaps they can make this all make sense for the rest of us. I'll open with a round of questions tailored individually to each of them. I'll start with you, Tal. Tal Shalev is the chief political correspondent for Walla News, the largest Israeli website providing independent breaking news and analysis 24 hours a day. She covers Israel's prime minister, government, and parliament, as well as the country's foreign and diplomatic affairs. She's a columnist for the Jerusalem Post and a presenter on Knesset TV. She's also worked as a news editor for the Israeli daily Haaretz and the international television network I-24 News. In 2018, Tal was selected as one of the 40 most promising Israelis under 40. All of these accomplishments and accolades are well known. Lesser known are some highlights from Tal's early journalistic career, which include an article for the spring 1997 edition of the Olive Branch, the newspaper of the Seeds of Peace youth organization. I happen to know that because I was editor of that issue. She is, according to her own Twitter feed, and I quote, basically a political junkie. And that is why it is especially appropriate to begin our discussion with her. So Tal, how do we make sense of these results? Is this a tectonic shift in Israeli politics, as the parliamentary balance indicates? Or is this a continuation of the deadlock, as the raw vote totals seem to show? Who are the winners and losers of this campaign? How and why did they win and lose? What, if any, issues tipped the balance so apparently to the far right?
So, hi everyone. I want to apologize in advance that I'm kind of like in a bunker-like background. I'm trying to facilitate. The truth of the matter is that I'm in the middle of work in Jerusalem because there's currently, the president is receiving all of the, there's a ceremony that the president receives all of the representatives of all of the parties that were elected in the Knesset, and they're kind of, and they recommend who is their prime minister. So I'm kind of in between, and that's why I look like I'm in a bunker, but I'll hope it's okay, and I'll try to improve it as we move on. I'm happy to be here, happy to speak with you and share, I gotta admit to begin with that we are there are a lot of unknowns right now. So there are a lot of questions that I've been being asked these days about how the next government is going to look. It's very difficult to say because we're just now in the midst of the process of building the coalition. And of course, we know it's going to be a very far right, ultra-Orthodox coalition, but how far will its policy actually be? That is still an unknown. So I'm going to say that we don't know a lot of things. And personally, I'm going to admit that I didn't predict this result. I always used to say that, journalists should not try and predict the future and only analyze what's going on right now in the present. And I got to admit that I was pretty sure all the time that if Netanyahu didn't reach the 61 majority in 4 election campaigns, he wouldn't reach it at the 5th time. And I was mistaken because I underestimated the maths of the system. And at the end of the day, the answer to your question, your basic question, is this a tectonic shift in Israeli politics? Then we got to admit that no, it's not a tectonic shift in Israeli politics. When you look at the popular vote at the end of the day, you see almost a tie between, there's about 30,000 votes separating between Netanyahu's camp and the camp of his opposition. But the huge gap, the wide gap in the Knesset is, of course, a result of the numbers. And that's where the mathematics come into play. And at the end of the day, you mentioned it, we had the story of this election is very clear. You had Netanyahu operating in one united bloc who has been very coordinated, very loyal to Netanyahu, and have all of the parties in his bloc, whether it's the Smotrich and Ben Gvir party or the ultra-Orthodox parties. They were willing to, they were loyal and willing to Netanyahu lead the campaign. And he had a very, very, very organized campaign. And he had a very organized map. Netanyahu knew that he has to fight for every vote. So Netanyahu organized the whole right-wing bloc in 4 parties. All of them were large parties. All of them had voter sharing agreements between them. He maximized the vote altogether. And he also, when you look at the numbers, and now we are already analyzing the numbers, and we can see where there's been a rise in voter turnout, then you see all of the Likud strongholds had a raise in voter turnout. And all of the center-left strongholds had the opposite, had a decline in their voter turnout. And my explanation for this is very simple, is when the Likud went to, and the Haredi parties went to the opposition, the minute you're in the opposition, you're hungry. And the center-left electorate was not hungry enough. And then you have Netanyahu, who really excellence, even excelled his own expectations, I think, in this campaign, in how precise it was and how divided it was. He had his ultra-Orthodox parties campaigning on one thing, and he was campaigning on other issues. And that way, they kind of got the whole span of the right-wing electorate. But on the other hand, and in a mirror image, you had a totally divided left-wing bloc. You had Yair Lapid, who basically was prime minister, and he was using his time in the prime minister's office to campaign, but he had no authority or no influence whatsoever over the parties in his bloc. So he failed to bring to a unification between Meretz and Labour Party, the 2 left-wing parties, leaving them both to basically battle and enter a survival battle at the end of the campaign. He failed to prevent the split up of the joint list. He failed to organize equitable voter sharing agreements. So the Arab parties didn't sign any voter sharing agreements at all, meaning that there are about 300,000 votes that just in the center-left bloc that went down the drain, just because he neglected this part of the map. And also, Yair Lapid was a bit arrogant. He thought that he could camp, or maybe arrogant or underestimated. It's not necessarily arrogancy, but he underestimated how strong the position of prime minister is for campaigning. So even if he wasn't campaigning to Meretz and directly to Meretz and Labor voters, the fact that Meretz and Labor voters, for the first time in 12 years, had a prime minister from their own camp in the prime minister's office, led many of them to move over to Lapid. And it didn't even matter if Lapid tried to prevent it. He wasn't cautious enough. And he wasn't cautious enough during the campaign. Now, Lapid is not, of course, the only person to blame here. We have, of course, Merav Michaeli and her stubbornness, who rejected all the pressure to join forces into a technical bloc with Meretz. We, of course, have the Arab politicians, who should be responsible for themselves for the small political games they were playing. But at the end of the day, the Arab voter turnout was actually good, despite the very pessimistic expectations. And I'm sure Muhammad will be talking about that later. Last but not least, I want to say something why it's not a tectonic change. When you look at the end of the day, we tend to think that the previous government had a majority of 61 seats when it started out, and then it had 60 seats after Idit Silman left, the Bennett-Lapid government. But we forget that Bennett joined the government without the support of his base. Bennett had 7 seats in the last elections. Most of his supporters did not support the government that he established. So at least 5 out of those 7 seats went back to Bibi's bloc the day after he formed the government, or in the 2 or 3 weeks after he formed the government. When we look at Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir and we see, wow, how the far right has become so stronger in Israel. Well, at the end of the day, they basically sum up the 2 parties of the previous election. There were 2 religious parties in the previous elections, Bennett and Smotrich, and they had 2 more seats from the Likud. So at the end of the day, the demographics of Israel are that there's a right-wing majority amongst Israeli Jews, and that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed since the first election. The only thing that changed is that the center-left had some kind of illusion that it had a majority. It had an illusion it had a majority because Avigdor Lieberman joined it first, then Gideon Saar joined, and then Naftali Bennett joined. But the fact that their figures joined did not mean that necessarily the right-wing voters actually joined the right-wing bloc. And at the end of the day, most of the traditional right-wing voters, those that, traditional Bennett voters, those that we tend to call soft right, a soft right electorate, their identity, their right-wing identity was much stronger than anything else, and they're just not Bibi identity. And the fact that Bennett didn't run, by the way, the fact that Bennett didn't run and left there was kind of a vacuum was created. There was no party that could really absorb the soft national religious voters that see themselves as right-wing, but do not agree or support Ben Gvir and Smotrich. They couldn't vote for Gantz. Gantz is a left-wing party for them. It's an issue of identity. And at the end of the day, we went back to the tribal identities and the Masorti, national religious settler. The identity of national religious party was stronger than the yes or no Bibi question.
All right. Thank you very much, Tal. Tal mentioned the role of the Arab parties. And so I want to turn to Muhammad with a question about that. But for introduction, Muhammad Daroshe is the Director of Strategy at the Center for Shared Society at Givat Chaviva, which is for more than 70 years one of the cornerstones and engines of civil society work for Jewish-Arab partnership and equality for Arab citizens in Israel. Mohammed holds a master's degree in peace and conflict management from Haifa University, and he's a Robert Bosch Academy Fellow and faculty member at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Mohammed served previously as co-director of the Abraham Fund initiatives. He's been recognized for his work with the Peacemakers Award from the Catholic Theological Union, the Peace and Security Award from the World Association of NGOs, and a Leadership Fellowship from the New Israel Fund. More apropos, in politics and government, Mohammed has managed election campaigns for the Democratic Arab Party and the United Arab List Party, and he has been elected to the local council of his hometown Iksal in Israel's northern Galilee region. He's served on the National Committee on Coexistence Education Policy, the three-sector roundtable at the Prime Minister's Office, and the Strategic Planning Authority for Economic Development of the Arab Sector. Less known, Mohammed has provided penetrating insight to just about every piece of research that I personally have ever conducted on Arab society and Arab-Jewish relations in Israel. And that's why I'm thrilled to share his uniquely in-depth perspective with all of you today. So Mohammed, Arab voters and political parties played crucial roles in these 5 elections. Far from passive observers, they were kingmakers and bloc breakers. These elections saw the rise and fall of the Joint List, a unified bloc of Arab parties, which was twice the 3rd largest party in the Knesset, and the historic first ever participation of an Arab party in an Israeli government, as well as huge swings in turnout, from a high of 65% in 2020 to a low of 44% in 2021, and back up to 53%, if I'm not mistaken, in Tuesday's election. And I'll just share briefly a graphic that provides some view of the vote for Arab parties and the turnout for our audience. So Mohammed, what is the legacy of this high-profile role that Arab voters and parties have played, and the divisions among the Arab parties and electorate that seem to have endured?
Well, thank you, Ned. I'm glad to be joining you and Tal and Michael in this session. I think that when you talk about the turnout aspect, I think that's really the key matter. Why are we seeing this fluctuation in turnout? Why is it happening so dramatically within 3 years, or even less, within 2 years? We were at 65%, dropped to 44%, up now bouncing to 53%. It tells you that the Arab public is not stable in its relationship with the political scene in Israel. And I would like to indicate 3 main relationships here. One, the relationship with the Arab political parties that formed the Joint List, which seemed for a moment in the year 2020 that it is answering the aspirations of Arab citizens that do not really see that much difference between the Arab political parties at the time. They didn't see the colors of gray or the grades of gray between one party or the other, because their political behavior in the Knesset was pretty much the same. And there was some kind of pressure from the Arab public saying, we'd like you to be together and we will reward you if you are together. And the reward was with 15 seats, with a huge turnout rate of 65%, and making them actually the kingmakers. And that's when they recommended Benny Gantz for prime minister to form that coalition. The problem was it was very simplistic type of recommendation. They did it without proper negotiations with Benny Gantz, and very different than the recommendation that was in 1992 with 5 Arab members of the Knesset that recommended to Rabin to form the coalition. But then that recommendation came with a price. The price that Rabin committed for an agreement with 28 points, which all of them, by the way, were fulfilled. And here the recommendation to Gantz was done for free, and the Arab public felt that their political leadership is very, very naive. That was the moment that we can say that the split in the Joint List started, because the public was saying, we will not give you back our trust because you do not behave politically in a very smart way. And basically, Ayman Audi, the head of the party, was basically saying, I was trying to keep my list, my joint list together, and we couldn't really negotiate further with Gantz because Balad was more radical and they couldn't really agree on anything with Gantz except just the recommendation, and even them, they've pulled their recommendation afterwards. Then came the recommendation on Lapid in the last elections, and it also was for free. And the weight of impact of the joint list will pretty much dissolve, which allowed another split. Now, not in the shape of the Islamic movement, but in the shape of ballot from that list. So the Arab public is actually very engaged in politics. You know, people say that they're pulling out of the voting system. They're not. Non-voting is a political statement. It's first of all a statement of discomfort with the Arab political leadership and the way it behaves in a very immature political way, in a very ineffective political way. The second is a vote of no confidence in the center-left political parties. And here I want to split this discussion into two. One, in the leadership of the center-left, whether it is Gantz or Lapid, that did not deliver. They received the recommendations. The Arab public feels that they are the ones that crowned these two leaders to become the leaders of the center-left, and both failed them. There was a promise to change the nation-state law. There was a promise to amend the nation-state law, to legislate an equality law, to try to make amendments in the Kamenitz's law, which limits housing housing permits and things like that, to connect Arab homes with electricity and so on. And in reality, for practical reasons also, because the life of the government is very, very short in Israel, none of these promises also came to fruition. Maybe there was an intention to fulfill, but there was no capacity to really fulfill those recommendations. So the Arab public is saying, okay, you ask for trust, you get that trust, you don't deliver, we pull back. And it is a vote of no confidence. It is a choice not to vote, and I don't call it ideological boycott. Actually, it's a practical boycott. And we see that when they see conditions a bit different a little bit, they come back. And Tal mentioned it, as an optimistic rise. I think it's a technical rise. It's a rise of those that took they were upset and angry at the Arab parties, and they came back. But those that were upset at the center-left parties did not come back. Just about 2 elections ago, which was about 2 years ago, Jewish political parties received more than 100,000 votes from the Arab community. In the last elections, they received less than 50,000 votes. So half of the voters that voted for Jewish political parties did not come back to vote at all. And that's the big story. That's one of the big stories. The center-left bloc lost almost 2 seats from the Arab parties that used to go for center-left Jewish political parties, like Meretz, like Labour Party, like even Lapid. Let's go back to another reason why people didn't vote, because and many were gambling a year and a half ago that the Arab public is voting only for social economic issues in the Arab community. False. The Arab community is also voting based on Israel's relationship with the Palestinians. The Palestinian file is back in strong power. About 2 months ago, when Lapid assumed government, polls indicated that Yesh Atid would be getting somewhere around 3 seats from the Arab community. 3 seats. That's almost equivalent to 90,000 votes. And the Arab citizens were basically saying, we will come back to vote, even to Jewish political parties. Those that will dismayed from Arab parties is one thing, but now with a figure like Lapid, who is representing the center-left, he's the partner we want to partner with. What happened in the last 2 months? A military attack or military campaign on Gaza that the Arab citizens did not feel it was justified. It was over-proportional use of power in the eyes of most Arab citizens. Then we had Jenin. Then we had Nablus, Shechem, and with a little bit of flare-up in the last week in Hebron. And people did not see that this is justified. Maybe for Lapid, this was helpful to reinstate, or for Gantz, it was helpful to reinstate their status as security leaders, that they're hard on security issues, but they, let's say, their gamble to be seen hard on security in the eyes of what's called the soft right didn't really pay off, and in the process they lost that potential of 3 seats for the center left from the Arab community. The last point in this matter is that I believe that the echo of the nation-state law still is there. People didn't pulled out from the voting system. In 2020, it was a knee-jerk reaction. People believed that they can defeat the nation-state law. So that's why they came back with full force in 2020 with 65% turnout. But when they felt that the Jewish left leaders are not doing it, they said, okay, we understand that this is not a fair game, so we don't want to play in it. And I must also indicate that the Jewish center-left parties presented very weak Arab candidates, whether it is Ghaidar Rinawi from Meretz, whether it is Labour Party or people in Yesh Atid, people that didn't have any record in the Arab community as either social leaders or economic leaders or educational leaders or political leaders. Ibtisam Marani, for example, from Labour Party, I've never seen her in any public event in the Arab community. And suddenly she's brought to be crowned as a representative of the Arab community at the Labour Party. So that's not an attraction. Actually, she becomes an obstacle for Arab voters to see such Arab representation in mainstream Jewish political parties. Now, what will bring the Arab voters in the future? We're too early to talk about that, but the Balad experience, to see the rise of Balad getting almost 4 seats, 3.5 seats almost, is an interesting matter. I don't think it's an ideological vote. I do not think it is more radicalization in the Arab community. I think it is more knee-jerk reaction against the leadership of Ayman Odeh. Most Arab citizens hold Ayman Odeh as responsible for the collapse of the joint list, responsible for the demolition of the dream of the Arab community in creating one home for Arab citizens, and they punished him. And they punished him by voting to the one that was most vocal against him this time. The United List, headed by Mansour Abbas, tuned down their opposition to the joint list in the last elections because they only wanted to maintain their base of support, the 4+ seats that they got the last time. They increased this a little bit, so they got 5 seats this time. So their campaign was to try to focus and to maintain their base. They didn't really have any serious increase, except in some of the Bedouin towns in the north. Other than that, they didn't get any real increase. And mainly because they had a candidate, Dr. Yasser Hajirat, who's a Bedouin Arab leader from Bir al-Maqsour town, and he managed to attract another 10,000, 15,000 votes, and that's the shift, that's the change actually in the base of the United Arab List. But Balad actually punished very successfully from the perspective of, from the joint list. They punished Ayman Odeh, but they did not benefit from it. They got 3.5 seats, which ended up harming Arab representation. So with the same amount of votes that the Arab parties received altogether, almost 500,000 votes, they got 10 seats. The same amount of votes that were given to the religious Zionism got them 14 seats. So that's a loss of 4 seats that is dramatic. Add to it merits, that's the gap between the center left and the right-wing coalition that Binyamin Netanyahu has around him right now. Now, let me touch on another point that I would like to mention. I went into an interesting personal campaign in the previous elections. I ran a party called MAN, which basically campaigned under the concept that we want all in. We want to participate in the full game. And I pulled out, I packed it within about 10 days before the elections. But interestingly enough, this discussion was brought also about 12 days before the elections. A poll by a Makan radio station showed that 57% of the Arab public wants the Arab parties to be part of a future coalition. 57%. 67% of Ra'am wanted that. That's a united list. And 47% of the joint list voters wanted that. And I think that was also one of the reasons of the split between Hadash and Ta'al versus Balad, because they were hoping to fulfill the, let's call it the new drive in the Arab community to get more involved in practical politics, politics that resolves the daily issues, that deals with the daily life matters of the Arab citizens, that leads towards equal integration of Arab citizens. Today, I'm not sure this is really reflected probably in a proper way with the current political options available for Arab citizens.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, for that detailed picture. And of course, we have to think about this not only in Israeli context, but also international context and beyond. And for that, I'm going to turn to Michael Koplow. Michael is the Chief Policy Officer of Israel Policy Forum. He also serves as Senior Research Fellow of the Kogod Research Center at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. Before coming to Israel Policy Forum, he was the founding program director of Israel Institute. Michael holds a BA from Brandeis, an MA in Middle Eastern Studies from Harvard, a JD from Harvard University, from New York University. And because those degrees were apparently not enough to hold a steady job, he also earned a PhD in government from Georgetown, where he specialized in political development and ideology and the politics of Middle Eastern states. Michael writes Israel Policy Forum's weekly Koplow column. If you don't subscribe, now is the time to begin. It's a leading source for commentary and analysis on Israel and American Jewry. His work regularly appears in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, The Forward, and many other publications. He's a leading expert on the inside baseball, not only of Israeli politics, but of US-Israel relations and the politics of Israel among American Jews. And that's what I hope he can shed light on first. Michael, what are the potential impacts of these elections and of the expected next Israeli government on Israel-US relations and on US-Jewish politics? Did those issues play any role in the campaign in Israel? How have the US administration and the US Jewish community and institutions responded to the apparent return of Netanyahu to power with coalition partners, some of whom have been refused visas to the United States due to their connections with far-right extremism?
Thanks, Ned, and always great to listen to Tal and Mohammed. Better to do it in person, but on Zoom is good too. So let's start with U.S.-Israel relations, because I think that there are lots of questions, not only about what U.S.-Israel relations will look like, given the fact that we're almost certainly going to have Itamar Ben-Gvir as a cabinet minister, but also what's it going to look like now that we're going to have Netanyahu return as prime minister. Obviously, Netanyahu has had famously strained relations with Democratic presidents in the past. It was the case way back when he was prime minister the first time with President Clinton. It was more prominently the case when President Obama was in office. And so I think there are lots of questions floating out there about what's going to happen. So I think off the bat, it's very unlikely that we're going to see any type of real break or rupture in U.S.-Israel relations. First of all, President Biden is not President Obama. He has a longstanding and independent relationship with former and soon-to-be Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's kind of easy to forget now, but the first 6 months of the Biden administration took place while Netanyahu was still Prime Minister of Israel. So it's not just about a previous relationship between the two men. Even as president, Biden and his administration, and I should note that almost all the people in the administration are still in place. So the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, even the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs, all of them dealt with Netanyahu during the first 6 months of this administration. So I think that there's a foundation upon which to build, for starters. Second, U.S.-Israel relations in many ways are I don't want to say immune, but are in many ways shielded from the daily politics of what takes place in Israel, and even from some of the personalities. It's a long relationship. It's based on many things. It's very institutionalized, and so even when you had the type of open fighting between Obama and Netanyahu that you had in 2015 and 2016, you didn't see a real break. You saw lots of political tumult at the top, but you didn't really see a downgrade in relations. So, I think that's important off the bat. With that said, this is definitely going to be a challenging time. And it's because of personalities and it's because of policies. So when we start with personalities, yes, Biden and Netanyahu have a relationship, and Biden is not Obama. I think that it will be difficult to criticize him or portray him as anti-Israel the same way that Prime Minister Netanyahu and other folks in Israel did with President Obama. But that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be friction. And I still do think that Netanyahu is unique in the sense that he's really the first Israeli prime minister who benefited politically from a spat with the United States. It's something that he actually, I think, used to political effect back towards the end of the Obama administration, in many ways running against the US, running against Obama, portraying himself as someone who was standing up to the US president. You saw that rhetoric actually a little bit come out in this campaign. One of the things that he said to contrast himself with Prime Minister Lapid was that Lapid was always getting rolled by the Americans. He pointed to the gas deal with Lebanon, the deal that I should note Netanyahu was almost certainly not going to pull out of, but he held that up as an example of Lapid not being able to say no to the U.S., whereas Netanyahu, has a record of saying no to the U.S. And so I do think that there's still going to be some political benefit for him when convenient to either create some daylight or portray some daylight between Israel and the United States, so that he can show that he's independent. Moving beyond that, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir are going to present problems for the U.S.-Israel relationship. There's lots of speculation over the past couple of weeks about whether the Biden administration is going to boycott Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. There is precedent for this following Sabra and Shatila and the massacres in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon in 1982. U.S. administrations, and this is across a number of administrations, refused to meet with Ariel Sharon, despite the fact that he was still an Israeli cabinet minister. So there is precedent for this. Also important to note that Itamar Ben-Gvir has a conviction inside of Israel for support for a terrorist organization. That organization was Kach, Kahana Chai, the organization founded by the late Rabbi Meir Kahana. Kach is a designated terrorist organization both in Israel and in the United States. So that, I think, makes it very easy for the U.S., if it so chooses, not to deal with Itamar Ben-Gvir. I think it probably also gives good cause. You reference folks within his party. Michael Ben-Ari, who comes to mind as people who've been denied visas in the to come to the United States. I think there's a great case to be made that Itamar Ben-Gvir should and perhaps will be denied a visa to come to the United States. So I think that that's going to be something that the administration is likely to do, and something that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir picked up on, because even before the election, they were criticizing the United States for interfering in Israeli elections by floating the idea that they wouldn't meet with them if they were part of the government. So that's going to be an issue, but I think that it's going to be even more of an issue because there isn't going to be a united front on this. If the Biden administration decides that they're not going to deal with Ben-Gvir or Smotrich or anyone from Otzma Yehudit or maybe even religious Zionism, that's not going to hold true necessarily for non-Biden administration figures. And that will include House Republicans, maybe even Senate Republicans, and potentially Republican governors. And if Itamar Ben-Gvir, let's say, does get a visa to come to the United States, and the Biden administration refuses to meet with him, but he's up on the Hill meeting with the Freedom Caucus, or gets invited to a state with a Republican governor, and is held up as an example of a strong, robust Israeli nationalism, and as someone who's willing to stand up for strong nationalist principles, that's going to cause, I think, certainly will cause some discomfort within the Biden administration. It will also send mixed signals on U.S. policy and U.S.-Israel relations, and that has the potential to bring us to a point where, rather than have a united front when it comes to U.S.-Israel issues, we end up with this sort of bifurcated policy where the administration does one thing and members of Congress do another, and that kind of thing just turns Israel into even more of a political football in the United States than it already is. And within the Jewish community, the same holds true. We've seen a variety of responses from Jewish community institutions, both before the election and since the election. There are some organizations that were quick to warn about what would happen if Ben Gvir and Smotrich were part of a government before the election happened, and have issued statements since, issuing that same warning. In some cases, we've even seen open requests to Prime Minister Netanyahu not to include Smotrich and Ben Gvir in a government. The Zionist arm of the conservative movement, for instance, that's large C conservative movement, the Jewish conservative movement, issued an open letter to Netanyahu yesterday on this front. We've seen other organizations talk about the strength and robustness of Israeli democracy and the need to respect the will of Israeli voters, and that they're not going to prejudge anything. And we've seen some organizations not comment on Smotrich and Ben Gvir either overtly or even hint to it. So there's been this range of responses. I think that American Jewish institutions don't quite know how to deal with this. For some, there's an obvious approach on the left. For some on the farther right, there's also an obvious approach, which is to say, these guys are perfectly fine. But I think for many organizations in the middle, it becomes very uncomfortable to be in a situation where you aren't just necessarily criticizing something the Israeli government does, but you may be refusing to meet with Israeli government officials or not welcoming them into American Jewish institutions. And the fact that there isn't a unified front now, I think points to the fact that we're going to see, similar to what I think we'll see between Democrats and Republicans, we'll see this across American Jewry. Bezalel Smotrich, about a year ago, was invited to the UK by the Bnei Akiva youth movement, where he was supposed to, I shouldn't say he's supposed to, he went and he gave a series of talks to Bnei Akiva groups in Britain. And when he got there, the board of British Jewish Deputies, which is the official organization that speaks for British Jewry, tweeted at him in Hebrew. I don't remember the exact wording of the tweet itself, but it was something to the effect of, Bezalel, you're not wanted here. Get back on the plane and go home and be remembered as a disgrace forever. And when that happened, and this was when Bezalel Smotrich was in the opposition, Israeli President Bougie Herzog rebuked British Jewry publicly and said, Bezalel Smotrich is a member of Knesset. He's the leader of a well-respected party with a long history, and it's inappropriate for Israeli politicians to be treated like that overseas. We're going to see that supercharged, and I have no doubt that there are American Jewish organizations that will welcome Ben Gvir and Smotrich here. I have no doubt that they will be honored at some organizations' galas and asked to speak in different places, and that too is going to cause lots of divisions within American Jewry. And I'll close by saying that U.S. policy, there's no official role for American Jewish institutions or kind of organized American Jewry, in the U.S. policymaking process when it comes to Israel. But policymakers oftentimes from both parties take their cues on policy toward Israelis and Palestinians from the American Jewish community, and I think that it's gonna sow even more confusion when the Jewish community in the United States is not on the same page, internally. And I think the people on the outside, only 2% of this country are Jews. I think the other 98% are going to be looking at this and not necessarily understanding what exactly is going on and how these divisions are playing out, and it's going to inevitably play into partisan divides in the United States as well, with different sides seizing on the Israeli figures that they like the best and that sort of showcase their values. And I think that we're in for a very difficult time, irrespective of policies that get implemented. I know I said I'd speak about policies as well. I'll just quickly mention that many of the policies that the new Israeli government is expected to undertake, I think some are things that the Biden administration will not like, but they will still be considered internal Israeli policies. I'll be surprised if the administration doesn't comment, for instance, if there's a judicial reform bill passed that eliminates the Israeli Supreme Court's oversight of the Knesset, but that doesn't mean the administration will do something about it. It will be very different if the new Israeli government, for instance, decides to apply sovereignty to all Israeli settlements, something that Bezalel Smotrich has already called for as a condition for joining the government. It will be difficult for the Biden administration to swallow it if there is outright de jure annexation. If rules of engagement for the IDF and the Israeli police are loosened so that the record number of Palestinians who have been shot by the IDF in the West Bank this year, goes up even more next year. All of that is going to be difficult for the U.S. government and will cause serious tension. So I do think that we're in for rocky times ahead.
Thank you, Michael. And Tal, I see you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some breaking news that happened while we were speaking. It kind of sheds a light on what Michael has been talking about with Ben Gvir. Herzog, who's in the middle of this ceremony, the president who's been meeting the party representatives all day long, and he meets with each party and he has a conversation with them. What are their plans for the government, et cetera, et cetera. So he had a meeting with the Shas party tonight, and he was caught after the meeting ended. He was caught on mic, with an open mic incident, saying, "You're going to have a problem with Temple Mount. The whole world is concerned from Ben Gvir." I told him as well. Now, Herzog is going to become, I predict, Netanyahu's new Shimon Peres. He will be, in many ways, the moderate face, the international face that he will be sending to try and, bring to try and moderate the face of the government. He already started, by the way. He was in Sharm el-Sheikh this week at the COP21 summit, and he met the MBZ, and he met King Abdallah, and all of these people. From what I understand, what Herzog is hearing from the international community is a lot of grave concern about Temple Mount. And if Ben Gvir turns into the police minister, the Homeland Security minister, that gives him authority and stature regarding Temple Mount. And as we know, Ben Gvir himself is a pro-Jewish Temple Mount for Jews to come back to Temple Mount. So anyway, I just want to say that I think that the diplomatic question about Ben Gvir, it's not only if Ben Gvir is going to be accepted or not, it's this face of Israel outward, the international face of Israel. And just want to add something on what Michael said regarding the override bill, the suggestions for the judicial system. From all of the things that, in my personal opinion, from all of the things that this so-called nightmare government is, there are a lot of people who think this is a doomsday government and are exaggerating with their reaction to this government, to this emerging government. But from all of the things, in my opinion, I think Ben Gvir might turn out to be, more responsible than we knew him the minute he gets a post. That usually happened to Avigdor Lieberman in the past and Naftali Bennett in the past. Lieberman in 2009 was treated as a pariah, not as much as Ben Gvir, but in a similar way. But I think that the judicial system reforms, that is where Israel is going to need, or the Israeli liberal camp is going to need the international community even more, because that is it's a significant change to the Israel democracy if they legislate a bill that will enable them to override the Supreme Court rulings. That means essentially that there's nothing left much of the checks and balances in Israeli democracy. It will give the parliament and it will give even more the government over almost complete control over everything, with no checks and balances from the Supreme Court. And in my opinion, that is more dangerous to all of the minorities in Israel than just Ben-Gvir becoming this minister or that minister, because this is the end of the day. We have no constitution. At the end of the day, the Supreme Court has been the prime protector of minority rights in Israel in the past 30 years or so. And I think that this is where this government, who is very keen on it, even if Netanyahu seems reluctant, all of his partners are pushing him to go through far-reaching judicial reforms. And that is where I think Israel might be going through a tectonic change, not necessarily in the results, but in what will happen after the results. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Tal. And Mohammed, I see you'd like to respond.
Yes, I mean, it's pretty much not that much of a response, but a little bit of a different perspective than what Tal said. I do see the huge danger in Ben-Gvir assuming an executive office, mainly because he built his career on anti-Arab incitement and even leading to clashes that built his political base. The clashes that he led in May 21 and the scenes that he keeps making in Sheikh Jarrah. And I think with his entourage entering Arab towns and cities and staging visits to Lod, Ramle, Jaffa, Haifa and Akko, to the mixed cities, I think that will serve him politically very well. I don't think that he is at the peak of his political career. You can see his celebrations, people chanting Ben-Gvir for prime minister. And I think that this actually might feed his ego, and he might try to expand way beyond the 14 seats that the National Zionism Party or Jewish Zionist Party received. So I don't think he's ready to moderate yet, because radicalization has been paying off very well for him. I think that he is looking for the next elections of being in the 20s and maybe actually sharing a premier position in the future. And that's why I do expect him to continue this direction. And actually, I do expect two dynamics that might happen with the Arab community. One, continued legislation, anti-democratic legislation, which is, in addition to what Tal said, overall Israeli democracy shrinking. It's more an anti-Arab legislation. So it's not just anti-democratic, but anti-Arab legislation. And in addition, I think that there will be what we call social economic discrimination that he will exercise, mainly because there will be fight on the budget. The money will be attracted to go to settlements, so will be attracted to go to the political base of Shas, of Yadut Torah, of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. They want to bring money to their political base, and when they're in government and they probably will get half of the ministerial positions, that means that many of those governments will probably not continue the fulfillment of government decision 550, which allocated 330 billion shekels for infrastructure development of the Arab community, for educational development, for housing, relieving housing problems, and so on. I think that much of that is going to be halted. And in addition, if he's going to be the head of the police, the minister of the police, it's not only incitement issues, but I think that he has the authority also to push further house demolitions at a large scale. In Israel, there are almost 50,000 Arab homes that are built without a permit. And about 11,000 of them have already court orders against them to demolish them. So it doesn't take much to actually bring this to implementation. The implementation of those decisions is in the hands of the executive force, unless Binyamin Netanyahu is scared of, sees this and is scared of Ben Gvir, both on the political future arena as a competitor for him, or on the international arena because he might be embarrassing for him a little bit beyond what the embarrassment. But let's remember that actually Netanyahu gave the space for the Ben Gvir and Smotrich to actually expand and grow to this level.
Thank you, Muhammad. And Tal, Muhammad is mentioning a decision 550, which was a large, and it was the second in a series of decisions to invest large sums in development of infrastructure and really in attempting to remedy many decades of systemic discrimination. But two recent Israeli governments, including, interestingly, one of Netanyahu's governments, in which Netanyahu himself cast the tie-breaking vote in favor of the largest ever investment in ending discrimination or remedying discrimination in budgets against the Arab citizens. This...
Can I rephrase that?
Okay.
I don't think he did it because he wanted to end discrimination. I think he did it because
to strengthen the economy.
he thinks it's good for Israel's economy.
Yes.
And it's
yes,
a meeting
absolutely.
of interests. It's a meeting of interests of both the Arab community and the Israeli economy.
Absolutely. There's no daylight between us on that question. But an interesting dynamic that I think is coming up in our conversation, and that I see in headlines and really in opinion pieces, dueling opinion pieces. Even in the New York Times, there have been two major op-eds published, one by Thomas Friedman saying, "The Israel that I knew is gone." And then another one from Brett Stevens today saying, "Everyone is really exaggerating, calm down." And you can see, I've seen pieces like this also in the Israeli press. And they often center around these two figures, Netanyahu, who is depicted as, certainly right-wing, but very cautious, a conservative, not someone who likes to enter into wars or large military operations, not someone who likes to engage in risky maneuvers. And then Ben Gvir, who, as Mohammed points out, his entire political identity and career is of radicalization and provocation, and often, with certainly hints, not just hints, pulling out a gun at a demonstration, really encouraging violence, and the escalation of violence within mixed Arab-Jewish areas in Israel in 2021 has been a big theme in analysis of this shift in the recent elections. It's been seen as a major breaking point, and again, that might say that in Ben Gvir's point of view, this was effective. This served his purposes. So let me put this back to you with a question about the security dimensions of this. Which of these do you think is likely to prevail? This more conservative, cautious version of Netanyahu? Is he the leader? Or is it this, firebrand, radical provocation, racism of Ben Gvir? And I'll say that I saw the tweet from Tal, which showed a picture of Ben Gvir and Netanyahu meeting, and it said, "You can see in this picture who's the boss." Well, who is the boss?
Okay. So I think the million-dollar question is not necessarily if Netanyahu is the boss or Ben Gvir is the boss, but which Netanyahu is the boss. Because we know when we talk about be cautious and sensible Netanyahu, we're talking about the Netanyahu we knew for the past 12 years. It's a Netanyahu who always wanted to have like a moderate fig leaf center element in his coalition in order to kind of soften the international community's response to his right-wing government. It's a Netanyahu who we know prepared to attack Iran, but eventually never attacked Iran. And it's a Netanyahu who, for up until the end there with the annexation, I would say, debacle with President Trump, basically for 10 years, he didn't do anything dramatic. It was basically all about the status quo. And we know also Netanyahu, the old Netanyahu, the sensible Netanyahu, is also always very much wanted to protect the judicial system and understood how important the Supreme Court is to Israel's standing and Israel's reputation as a democracy. But the question is, do we still have the old Netanyahu, or do we have a new Netanyahu? The new Netanyahu is someone who in the past 3.5 years has enhanced his grasp over and his alliances, has strengthened his alliances with both ultra-Orthodox parties and radical far-right extremists such as Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And Netanyahu has a different goal. This is not Netanyahu just the politician or the leader. This is also Netanyahu who's currently under trial and is under 3 indictments. And that changed, we know, in the past 3.5 years, that changed the way he acted, because his legal status became one of his most important motivations. So if we look at the old Netanyahu, then he's sensible. But the new Netanyahu, first of all, has to have a right-wing government in order to try and stop his trial, or to cancel his trial, or reach a plea bargain, or get a clemency from the president at this point. That's the reason of this whole 61, quest for 61. This was the reason to begin with. And then there's a question, even if we have the old Netanyahu, is the old Netanyahu still in control? Because at the end of the day, what happened is like a golem. Netanyahu created a golem. He created a monster which is stronger than him. When Netanyahu first sponsored Ben Gvir, I don't think he imagined he would reach the 3rd largest party. And also, I don't think he imagined that the ultra-Orthodox party would rise so much. And you look at Netanyahu inside his coalition, he has 64 seats in his new coalition. He has only half of them. 32 of them belong to him, but 32 belong to his partners. And in a way, he's captured by his promises to his partners and also by his promises to his base. Because even if Herzog were to come now and would say, please, Netanyahu, let's form a national unity government. Let's try and bring Lapid and Gantz so we can keep Ben Gvir outside. Netanyahu can't do that. His right-wing base, he's been promising them for 3.5 years that if he has a homogenic right-wing majority, he's going to form a homogenic right-wing coalition. He can't abandon it just because Herzog said, or because someone is afraid from Ben Gvir. And also he will be taking a risk. Let's imagine a scenario in which Gantz and Lapid, or one of them, were to join a government with Netanyahu, and he would keep Ben Gvir on the outside. Do you know how strong Ben Gvir will be at the end of this term? He will become even stronger. He has to have him inside his government, because if not, he will be a right-wing, horrible opposition on the outside, and he will constantly portray Netanyahu as a leftist, as a weak leftist, right? So in a way, the new and old Netanyahu are already, he's hostage. He's been taken hostage by his own partners. So that's one of the questions that I say, I don't know now, which Netanyahu are we going to see? Which Netanyahu are we going to get?
If I may try to answer that, and I think Tal already highlighted it, I think it's going to be Netanyahu, the person, the individual, who wants to care for his own personal needs and trying to maintain any coalition that can protect him from legal actions. I think that's where Netanyahu's mind is. A more centrist government coalition with people like Lapid or Gantz will not be able to give him any of that kind of security that he's looking for. So that's why I think he will be willing to pay any price, really any price, for Ben Gvir, despite the fact that maybe it doesn't suit his ideological positioning, in order to try to escape legal processes. And that's really the big danger. He's in a sense, as a human being, as an individual, he needs to be saved. And I think that Ben Gvir is willing maybe to pay that price in order to maintain his potential of growing as a potential leader. He will pay the price for Netanyahu for the coming 3, 4, 5 years, but then wait in the corner to be the next one to inherit Netanyahu as the leader of the right wing in Israel.
And I'll just build on. I agree with everything that Tal and Mohammed said, and I want to build on one of Tal's points. It's not just an issue of whether we get the old Netanyahu or the new Netanyahu because his circumstances have changed in terms of his trials. The last version of Netanyahu we got was someone who risked the relationship with Jordan over very silly political things. If you read David Friedman's memoir, the last version of Netanyahu pretty clearly wanted to go for annexation of the West Bank, and only reluctantly took it off the table because of the Abraham Accords. But at least in Friedman's telling, both he and Netanyahu really preferred to go for annexation and felt like they had no choice but to pull it off. Let's not forget Netanyahu was prime minister in May 2021. There's an irony to the fact that much of the election results last week have been attributed to Israeli Jewish fears over the riots that happened in mixed cities in May 2021 and wanting to restore law and order. That happened under Netanyahu when there were actions he could have taken, I think, to calm things down ahead of time, and he didn't. In some ways he was somewhat responsible, but in terms of acting in a prudent fashion, but in other ways he wasn't. So, even if you leave the trials aside, I think that there is evidence that Netanyahu himself is a bit less cautious, or maybe believes in his own rhetoric about being the only person who can lead Israel, and as being the difference between Israel being a well-run state or burning to the ground, as Sarah Netanyahu famously said. I think that there's evidence that Netanyahu is sort of believes this view of himself, and that's even before you get to Tal's point about he will do anything to get out of his trials. And so I think that there's I'm not in the Thomas Friedman bandwagon. I think that everything requires a wait and see approach, right? To say just ipso facto based on these elections, the old Israel, even if it's an Israel that, whether or not it's an Israel that even ever existed, but the notion that the old Israel is dead, can't say that until we see what happens. But I also think that Bret Stephens' approach in today's times is remarkably sanguine, and I think there's plenty of cause for concern.
Thanks, Michael, and go right ahead, Tal.
I just wanted to add something about, is Israel changing, not changing? Look, at the end of the day, I think that the election results, in a way, were also a wake-up call for the liberal camp in Israel, the center-left liberal call in Israel. The demographics are not in our favor. We, in 10 years' time, it's not going to get any better. This is not just a mistake or one election in which the right-wing bloc won. These are the demographics. The ultra-Orthodox parties, the ultra-Orthodox communities are making more children than the secular children. And in 10 years' time, there'll be even more. And at the moment, as they have identified and linked themselves totally with Netanyahu. Now, is that forever? Not necessarily. It's true that both the ultra-Orthodox parties used to have political alliances with the other side. That's how we received the status quo to begin with, right? The ultra-Orthodox parties were the allies of the Labor Party for years. But what has happened to their electorate is that the ultra-Orthodox voters have drifted more and more to the right. And today they support Netanyahu even more than Netanyahu. But the demographics are not in I would say, the liberal camp's favor. it's just going to get worse. That's one. B, as depressing as that might be, as a secular Jew who understands that that I'm becoming a minority in my own country, there can be changes to demographics, not necessarily from, of course, not necessarily from the secular Jews in Israel making more children. That I don't expect that to happen. But there are immigrations. There have been over 100,000 Russian and Ukraine immigrants who arrived in Israel over the past year, and that could change the demographics. And another thing that has to happen and has to be said is that the Israeli center-left does not treat the Arabs as their allies, as the Israeli right treats the ultra-Orthodox parties as their allies. And as if they don't start to do that, if they don't start to treat the Arabs as their partners and accept them as their partners, then it will be very, very difficult for them to return to power. And even if we look back at the last time that the center-left was in power, Rabin and Barak, it was always because the Arab voters came out and helped them be elected. So if we look at how the so-called change government acted in this last election, they kind of forgot that they had this coexistence project with Mansour Abbas. They had this very unique partnership that brought, Arab representation to a new high. And the minute elections was called, everyone was running away from it. Nobody was presenting an alternative vision of coexistence. They all succumbed to the very heavy right-wing Netanyahu pressure against cooperation with the Arabs. And instead of highlighting this as an alternative to Netanyahu, instead of Yair Lapid going with Mansour Abbas, I would say on a rally tour all around the country and presenting him as the face of the next government, they ran away from it altogether. They didn't show off at all the change government. And I think that at the end of the day, the center left in Israel now has an opportunity for retrospect and to build itself. And one of the main questions it has to ask, and this also connects to what Mohammed said earlier about the Arab voters not voting for Zionist parties anymore. It has to ask itself how it enhances and strengthens its relationship with the Arabs, because at the end of the day, this is the alliance. These are our allies. And it doesn't seem in the future that the other side's alliance is going to break apart. That's it. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Tal. Muhammad, you wanted to respond?
Yes, actually, Tal started with what I wanted to say. I'll just add that it's not enough just to gamble on Mansour Abbas and maybe even the existing political options in the Arab community. Let's remember a couple of years ago, Meretz was challenged internally with discussion about its own identity as being Zionist left, or should it be a Jewish Arab political party? And I think if they would have made the choice to move into becoming a Jewish Arab political party, they would have really become the home of at least 2-3 additional seats from the Arab community that are looking for that kind of partnership. Instead, they affirmed and reaffirmed their Zionist left status. And even when they brought in Arab representation in the last list, it was very decorative type of representation. It was not people with any true record of work in the Arab community or any real capacity to attract votes. And we saw the results. The results for Meretz were really shaming results that showed the tension between Meretz and the Arab community, and not the partnership that they would have been able to really move into that direction. But I think that actually the hit that Meretz received maybe will allow the emergence of a new political entity that will be attractive for Jewish and Arab real partnership. Also in the electoral aspect, you need the Jewish leadership that can bring votes. You need Arab leadership that can bring votes. And I think that this will be nice addition to the relationship that Tal mentioned that Mansour Abbas brought into the game. And we started seeing also that Hadash-Ta'al are responding. The fact that they wanted to create some distance from Balad is an indication that they really want that kind of partnership to grow. And as just to finish with what Tal said, the liberal camp in Israel can never go to power, can never come back to power without refiguring the relationship of that with Arab citizens, legitimizing Arab political participation, not just in the representative bodies of Israel, but also in the decision-making bodies of the state.
All right, thank you very much, Muhammad. I know that people may need to wrap up soon, but I don't want to complete our discussion without going into more challenging territory. The West Bank, as was mentioned, has been the site of escalating violence in the last year. As we all know, the Palestinian Authority is on quite shaky ground in terms of its leader, Mahmoud Abbas, unelected now for more than a decade, and now 87 years old, and facing a great deal of opposition and frustration among the Palestinians. You mentioned the issue of the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, which is the disputed or jointly claimed holy site, in which there are two Muslim shrines, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, and which was the site of the ancient Jewish temple. It's right next to the Western Wall, which is the current site of the holiest site for Jews. And we've all mentioned that Ben Gvir is part of a growing movement among far-right religious Zionists to start Jewish prayer at that site, which is currently disallowed, and which people warn constantly would spark a regional conflagration. So quickly, and Michael, I know you have another appointment after this. What can we expect, or what obviously I'm not asking for a prediction, but what should be front of mind in terms of the Palestinian response to this new government, and perhaps the regional as well?
I think there's oftentimes a response that you see from Palestinians, and I hear from them directly, where they say that almost doesn't matter, right? Netanyahu, Lapid, no real difference between the two of them. I think that's partially driven by the fact that Israeli governments, even though the West Bank hasn't been annexed, Israeli governments have pursued in many ways what is de facto creeping annexation of the West Bank now for years, if not decades. So I think for a lot of Palestinians, the response is doesn't really matter. It's not gonna be good for us, no matter who the prime minister is. And so, maybe it's just degrees of difference. But I do think that, here in particular, the issue of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount is the most sensitive one for Palestinians. It's the most sensitive one for other countries in the region. It's not necessarily the most sensitive one for the United States or the Europeans, but I think they understand the potential that any changes on the Temple Mount have to spark violence and real chaos. And it's not just an issue of folks like Ben Gvir and Smotrich wanting to go up to the Temple Mount or wanting to change the status quo so that Jews can openly pray there. It's also just the rhetoric about Jewish sovereignty over the Temple Mount. And so, I think that is definitely something that there's going to be lots of pressure coming from with this government. With regard to the West Bank, there are all sorts of reasons for the increased violence in the West Bank over the past half year. Some of it has to do with loss of Palestinian Authority control and frustration with Palestinian Authority corruption and non-democratic governments. Some of it has to do with the fact that starting in the spring, Israel launched IDF operations that mean that we're now up to over 600 IDF raids inside of Area A per month. A place where there isn't supposed to be an IDF presence at all, according to the Oslo Accords. So, when you have a government that is going to be inclined to take a more hawkish approach to the West Bank, that's almost certainly going to increase settlement activity. that is almost certainly going to treat settler violence as an aberration rather than as a problem. That is all a recipe for even more instability in the West Bank, and I think more violence that will, of course, impact Israelis, but will obviously impact Palestinians on the ground and their quality of life, and the way in which they feel Israel controlling their daily lives even more than they already do. And all of this really is pointing toward, I think, what is the ultimate disaster, which is the potential collapse of the Palestinian Authority. Because if that happens, all bets are off. At that point, you have Israel having to go back into Palestinian cities and towns in Area A permanently and running the lives of Palestinians down, to the most minute detail. You almost certainly will have groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad taking advantage of a giant vacuum. For all the Palestinian Authority's faults, in many ways, they are the last thing standing between what's not a great situation now and complete anarchy. And what I worry about is that many of the policies that the new government might take are going to bring this scenario closer to reality. And I think that that's the big thing people should be keeping their eyes on.
Thank you, Michael. So we are coming close to our scheduled conclusion. I would first of all like to thank our panelists so much. And I do wish that we could go on maybe, but we'll have to probably do that at the next election. And on that note, if you've got a very quick final round, the last word, what you think is coming, and whether we'll be back again soon for the next in this installment of Israeli election analyses. You guys can go in whatever order.
I'll go in the first order because I personally, besides the fact that some people are very much concerned from the government and the coalition and Ben Gvir and Smotrich, I will admit and give a full disclosure that as a political reporter who has been working like crazy in the past 3.5 years, not knowing when the next election is going to happen, the only good part about this government is that there's a clear-cut majority, and there are high chances that this government will continue and conclude its whole term of 4 years. That being said, I would raise the possibility now, connecting to what you talked about earlier with the Palestinians and the West Bank and security escalation. I wouldn't rule down the possibility, rule off the opposite possibility that in a few months' time, if the security situation does dramatically escalate, God forbid, we will see a reshuffling of the government. We will see Netanyahu trying to bring in either Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid. At the moment, both of them, everyone is saying a no. But I do believe that if, God forbid, and again, I don't think it has to become very, very bad for them to join a government. But I do believe that Netanyahu at some point will try to expand his government and not leave it in this very narrow composement in the future.
Thank you, Tal.
Well, I'm usually a very optimistic person, but it's tough to get that much optimism from me this week. Maybe I need a few more months until I get back to my normal optimistic approach. The only good light at the tunnel is that Netanyahu likes to have the good economy. And that's why he might seek some kind of calm and maybe pay the price for that by acting as the left wing of the government. That said, it's like a combination of contradictions that Netanyahu is going to do that. But he is very much of, as you mentioned earlier, or was mentioned earlier, he's very much an economy-driven person, and I think he wants his legacy to be remembered as such, but he doesn't want also to pay the price the personal price of going to jail or being sent to history as a criminal. And that's why I'm less optimistic, because I think that if it means that he's going to sacrifice the situation for his own good, he will do it. If it means that he's going to annex more territories, such as the Jordan Valley, or maybe areas that are surrounding Jerusalem, like or around Jericho, he's likely to do it. Specifically, areas that already he's got the green light to do that from America from the United States in the deal of the century. And specifically when Benny Gantz was also in support of the deal of the century. So Benny Gantz will be embarrassed actually to stand against that, because he was part of the deal at the time. Whether Benny Gantz will be able to join the government, really, I don't know. It depends on, I think that the first priority that will be is not the Palestinian file. It's going to be the Netanyahu files. And once we know how that is going, then we'll know how the Palestinian aspect or how the Palestinian front will develop. If Netanyahu feels that he has no chance of escaping the legal process, I think that, as Mansour Abbas said it, we will probably face war.
So, I think that there are not going to be policy differences that bring this coalition down. We've seen that in previous Netanyahu coalitions. I think here, you have a pretty right-wing block of parties that agree on broad strokes of lots of stuff. There are disagreements over some elements, but there are no giant things here that are going to bring the government down policy-wise. I think that if it does not last, it will be over one of two issues. One, Tal highlighted, if there's a real deterioration in the security situation, I think that's one. And two, Netanyahu very well may get sick of having to deal with these personalities. It's not just a matter of having to deal with folks like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. It's all the Likud members who are going to be upset that they don't have the ministries they want, because only 32 of the 64 seats belong to Likud, and Netanyahu has to give ministries to his partners. So I think that there are going to be a lot of personnel headaches for Netanyahu to have to work through. And Netanyahu is always looking at polls, and right now Likud has 32. If 8 months from now, 10 months from now, the coalition has passed a bill that gets him out of his trials, and he's looking at polls that show Likud will get 36 or 37 or 38 seats, I don't think he'll hesitate to call an election. So those are the two things that I think have the potential to bring it down, but it's not going to be disagreements over real policy things. On there, I think that these parties are all relatively united.
All right. On those sobering notes, I want to thank all of you, and I want to also hope that I can bring the three of you back for another conversation, and I'll just hope that it's on some unexpected positive note that none of us predicted at this time. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the audience for joining us today. Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to our next meeting, hopefully in good times.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.